right, I'm in Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, I'm going to be spending some time in verse 28 with regards to stealing. But of course, we have to look at this from the context of Ephesians chapter 4, and that Paul has expressed to us that we have been made into a new person because of what God has done for us, and we are to discover and understand and embrace the truth that he has revealed in the light of what he has done for us. Okay? What we have is we have a new way of life, a new covenant, and to live this life that God has given to us, we're going to have to understand what is real, what is true, and that is only going to be revealed by our God. All right. Now, the comparison that's going to be made here is a comparison between the old covenant and the new covenant. That's the comparison. If Paul was teaching the old covenant, all he has to do is just say, well, God commanded us. That's one of the commandments of God, not to steal. All right, don't steal. That's the commandment. So obey God. And if you fail, then there will be punishment. But if you succeed, then there will be some blessings. That's the old covenant. And what a lot of people do when they don't understand the new covenant very well, what a lot of people will do is they will default back to living by the old covenant. And so it's important to understand the differences so you don't default and go back to what, the Lord set us free from. Because the commandment does not do anything to change a person's heart. All right, to change a person into someone new. The commandments will never do that. To declare that someone is to repent and obey is not going to do anything to change who they are as a person. All you're going to be able to do at best is get somebody's flesh under control with enough of an incentive to do so. Either you're going to suffer greatly for your violation, or you can be blessed for your success. And that's what people end up doing when they don't understand how far this goes. They don't go far enough in the relationship that God has called us to. Then you're going to have to just default back to, well, God says don't do this, so we don't do this. And that's what happens when people are looking at Ephesians chapter 4. They look at these items as the list. This is the list, and this one is one that's explicitly mentioned in the law of Moses. Don't steal. That's explicit. There's no confusion about that. And so people will look at this and they will say, okay, well then that one we incorporate in our lives now, and we continue to live in obedience to God. All right. Now, I'm not saying this in order to say it's okay to go out and steal, and to encourage people to go out and steal. That's not the purpose of this. It's to go to something else. The something else is to address the reasons why people will sin. Okay, that's the issue. People are not dealing with the reasons. They're not dealing with the cause of what drives a person to sin. When you just give the law, you're just doing flesh management. You're not dealing with the renewal of a person. Okay, that's not what's happening. So you may be able to achieve some success. All right, fine, good. That I don't want to say that's bad. And for those who are lost, for those who do not know the Lord, who are not connected with Him, they are alienated from Him. That's just about all you've got, is to use the law for the most part. That's all you've got to work with. But with us who have been born again by the Spirit, we have an opportunity for something more. Okay, and so Paul mentions a number of things, and I've been speaking about them on an individual basis with each different message, but they are all connected in the context of the renewal of the mind by truth. All right, they're all connected by that, and that we have a new identity in Christ Jesus. We are a new person. We are to receive what God has for us, and we are to live our lives according to what we have. And when he fulfills the deepest part of our being with what he gives to us, which really is just himself, and our needs are met through him in the core of our being, our spiritual needs, then what will happen is that the temptations to engage in sin or violating somebody else, those temptations will begin to dissipate because he's addressing the reasons why a person would be motivated to engage in sin, such as stealing, just to give you an example. All right, and so all of these are connected, and so as those temptations are reduced, as these opportunities show themselves, there will be occasions when you will feel encouraged to not engage in sin. And to me, the solution that needs to be understood here is to just simply not resist the change that God is doing within you. Just don't resist that. Allow that to be a new part of your life, a new way that you live your life. Don't resist the change. If that hasn't changed within you, then that's something to ask the Lord to do a work within you on, and maybe he will work with you on those issues, or, from what I've seen, most of the time he's working on other issues that a person isn't usually thinking about, and it will just take time, if they live long enough. That's just part of the life that we have. All right, so we are to appreciate whatever change happens, and not be occupied with those things that we would like to see different, but be thankful also for those things that are different. All right, and so this is the context in the new covenant. The context of the new covenant has to do with addressing the reasons why people engage in sin, not to just try to get the flesh under control, do flesh management, and apply enough incentive of either punishment or blessings. The new covenant is different, and it is, of course, much more effective. All right, so let me take a peek at verse 28 in this context from that point of view. Let him who stole steal no longer. All right, it's not a commandment. Well, I mean, it is a commandment in the Old Testament, but he's not presenting it as a commandment. He's saying, listen, just let this be the case. Those who were stealing, just let them just not do that anymore. Now there is something else. There are other things that they can be a part of. He does give a little bit of a solution at the end, and that is, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. All right, and there is something behind this that is related to a change of life and a change of purpose in verse 28. Okay, but he doesn't say don't steal or God is going to invade in your life and cause great suffering. He doesn't say that. He says do something else. Okay, it is the doing something else that really matters. It's that there is something else. If you just tell someone, look, just stop doing that, whatever it is, just stop it. Okay, that's not going to help. Stop this. Well, then what? Right? What are they going to do instead? There needs to be something to replace that. Okay, so also with the changed heart, until the heart is changed, all right, you don't have what you need in order to make these kinds of changes. So this is what he presents. He says, instead of doing that, here's an alternative. Do something like this. All right, and there may be some people who would feel inspired by that and say, oh yeah, I really like that idea. I just won't steal anymore. I'll go ahead and work with my hands, and I'll produce more than what I consume, and whatever I have left over, I'll give to others who have the need for those kinds of things. Some people will relate to it in that way. Other people will say, yeah, well, it's easier. It's easier to just steal something than it is to go through all that work and labor, and so how do you deal with that? There has to be something more than just, okay, here's an alternative. And a person will say, yeah, well, I don't really care for the alternative. Okay, there has to be a change of heart. of some kind, and the Lord will do a work within us such that we will be changed into a different person who won't feel inspired to steal. Okay? Because God deals with the other issues, the real issues behind it. Okay? Now let's talk about the different kinds of stealing, because there are many different ways that stealing takes place. All right? Probably the most popular that affects most people would be understood as taxation. Okay? Taxation is a form of theft, especially when it's not voluntary. Okay? When you have a group of people who are recognized as the authorities over other people, and they take from the other people and then keep some of it for themselves and then give the rest to their friends, or people who like them. This is a form of theft. All right? People don't usually think of it. And I can appreciate that there can be an opportunity for taxation in order for those people who are the recipients of the taxes to provide services for those who are contributing the taxes. But this has to be voluntary, it really does. In the Old Covenant, there was a taxation system. It was the tithe, and that was to support the government, the Levitical priesthood, who performed certain services and duties for the people. But there were rules behind that, and I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that and that it should be governed to an extent. And this was not voluntary. This is something that God established in order to establish the nation of Israel. But that doesn't automatically mean that it's not necessarily going to be a form of theft. All right. Now, if an Israelite failed to present their tithes, there was no punishment associated with that. All right. The Levites wouldn't come and confiscate your property because you didn't bring a portion of what you produced to Jerusalem or to the nearby Levites in your community, as I think it was every third year, something like that. You would present it to your local Levites as opposed to bringing it to the temple at Jerusalem. But it was all voluntary. There were no instructions given to the priesthood to say this is the punishment that you execute for a person's failure to present their taxes. All right, that's how he presented it. But you'll find in other cases, of course, that it is involuntary, that this is something that is applied by force, okay, as opposed to a voluntary system of some kind. And that can be described as theft, all right, as stealing. But when you have, a structure such as this, where you have the authorities who are engaged in theft, and they have a law, there's a decree, there's a declaration that this is okay, then it's no longer considered to be theft by most people. They say, well, there's a law. Somebody has decided that this is okay, that this is right, and because there is, this is legal, because this is a law, then it is not evil. And that's not necessarily going to be the case. I mean, I can understand that in many cases it would be a correct way of defining that. But, that doesn't mean every case. And I don't think in this case that makes it okay. It's still a form of theft, no matter how it's described or whether somebody says it's okay. And, and if somebody else does not say it's okay, well, how much power do they really have? How much authority do they really have? Can they really apply enough force to overcome the others who are obviously using force in order to take from somebody else? All right, now when it comes to taxation, there are two different forms of taxation. There is the direct form and there is the indirect form. All right, the direct form is by just declaring, this is what you are give to us. This is what you are to give to us. You give this, or we will come after you, and we will take your private property. You will lose your right to have personal property. We will seize it for ourselves, and then we'll decide what we're going to do with it. Okay, that's a direct form of taxation. An indirect form of taxation can be described as a currency devaluation. All right, that is an indirect form of taxation, and this happens with a currency system. All right, usually a central bank system. The currency systems and the central bank systems, they are designed in a way that the government can acquire money to spend on things that are interesting to them, and keep a portion of it for themselves. They're able to do that without directly taking it from somebody else. Instead, they just create the money. All right, that's what they do. And these systems are usually partnerships between private corporations, the banks, and the public entities, the governments. There's usually a cooperation that could be described as a cartel. All right. But when the government borrows money from the central bank, when they just create the money and issue it and start using it as currency, it's a form of counterfeiting. All right. That's really what it is. Now, you don't call it counterfeiting when the officials do it. But if you were to do it, well, then it's counterfeiting and then it's illegal. But if they do it, then it's holy. It's righteous. It's acceptable. But through these mechanisms that get defined within currency systems, there will be a devaluation of the currency. This is observed in what we call inflation. All right, and inflation is a devaluation of the currency, and the beneficiaries of that devaluation are the ones who counterfeited the currency and distributed it without any of their own personal labor attached to it. All right, that's a general description of the system that indirectly takes money from people. All right, indirectly takes it because they take the value of the money away from someone, and that's considered to be an indirect tax when the government does that. All right, that's called indirect taxation. So you have direct taxation and then indirect taxation, and the indirect is generally more popular because it's very unusual to find anybody to see what's going on, even though if they have a certain amount of currency and then 10 years later they can't acquire the same amount of stuff for that amount of currency, because prices have doubled maybe, then they just don't make a connection with that and say, well, where did my value go? Who took my value? Folks, it was stolen. Okay, it was stolen by the people who are operating the system. It was a form of indirect taxation that is in addition to the direct taxation. And this is a form of theft. Okay, now I've spent a lot of time talking about it because it is the most popular, or it is the most common. Obviously, when people think of theft, they're thinking about their own personal property being taken from someone else, not necessarily an official, and that happens, right? It happens a lot, but it's not the majority of stealing, okay? It just isn't. All right, now there are, examples of person's personal property being taken by someone else. That, of course, happens a lot. But let's consider the question of why. Why does a person steal? Why do people steal? What is the real motive? You can make the assumption that they do it because they have to. Okay? Because they have no alternative. And what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to die? If they don't take something that belongs to somebody else? I can understand that maybe on occasion this might occur. But in general, that's not what's going on. All right? It's not a moment of necessity. It just means that they're going to have to experience some change in their life. All right? Maybe they're going to have to downsize their living, their lifestyle, change the amount of consumption in their lives. They're going to have to reduce what they do with themselves. I mean, okay, but that's not really a necessity. They may think it's a necessity, but not everybody's going to think that that's a necessity. So on that basis, I'll tell you that most theft does not come from necessity. Right? I can understand that some of it does, but I will say that most comes from other reasons. Okay, that people do have alternatives. They can do other things besides going and taking property from somebody else. But they do this for other reasons. Now, what could some of those reasons be? Right? I mean, why would people do something that they don't have to do? Okay, well, one of the common reasons is that I expressed a little bit earlier is that it's easier. It's just easier than going out and doing other forms of legitimate work. I mean, there is going to be some effort involved in stealing something, but it's not as hard. Okay, so people will often take the approach or make the decision to do something that is easier than something else, because of course, labor is hard. Labor produces pain of some kind, and naturally we would like to avoid pain. So let's live off the labor of somebody else. All right, live off the labor of somebody else, and in effect, just either directly seize what they have, or maybe manipulate and deceive them, commit fraud in some way against them, and then take what they have. Maybe even using the legal system. There's a lot of that goes on, and it's because people are looking for something easier to do. Okay, it's not a matter of necessity; it's a matter of laziness. All right, that's what it is. And that they have decided that they are not really going to be a participant in society, but that they're going to be a parasite on society. You're either a participant or you're a parasite. One of the two. Either you are contributing to the lives of others or you are taking from the lives of others. All right? And this can show itself in a variety of ways. Okay? It's unfortunate, but that's just how it goes. And why? Because it's easier, not because it's necessary. All right. What other kinds of reasons might inspire people to go out and steal? Well, they could be bored. They just don't know what else to do with themselves. They're looking for some fun, recreation. And so, this is something they figure that they can do because, of course, in general, people don't steal something from someone else unless they believe they're going to get away with it. People don't usually include, oh, here's my chance to get caught taking something from somebody else and be punished. Oh, I'm really excited about that. They figure out a way to do it such that they believe they will be able to get away with it. And they might be able to get away with it. That happens a lot. But it's how they approach it. They approach it from the perspective of, I'm going to get away with it. I can get away with it, so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do this because I don't know what else to do. I'm bored. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what to do with myself. And you might think that that's a little bit strange, and it is strange, right? So it is bizarre, but that's a struggle that a lot of people have, especially younger folks who have not had much exposure to life, and they don't know about the various things that they can do. They just simply need to learn something new and experience something new and find out whether other kinds of options may be available to them. But when you're young, and especially if you don't have parents who are involved in your life, or you don't have any mentors, you don't have access to other people so much, what are you going to do? You don't even know. Well, here's something. I'll do this. I'll do this because it's fun. It's recreational. I won't feel so bored. This happens. I know this might sound a little bit strange, but it does happen, and it's a real motive as to why someone would go out and steal. What else? Well, you can feel a sense of power. You are now empowered. You are a capable person. You are awesome in your badness. All right, and you can maybe be respected by other people, not because you're so good, but you're respected because you're so bad, right? And usually because you don't know how to be good, you don't have any options in your head, in your mind, concerning what you might be able to do as an alternative. And so people pursue something wrong. They pursue sin. They pursue stealing, as an example, in order to try to define themselves as being the kind of person, all right, who can be respected, feared, all right. They can esteem a sense of pride from their accomplishment, all right, that they're bad. This is an attitude that gets presented. And so what's behind this, right? The person definitely needs an identity. They need to be somebody. Like we all need to be somebody in one sense or another. And so how do you deal with these things? Well, a person needs to know who they are in Christ Jesus. They need to become a different person, a child of God, a participant in the work of God. Those kinds of things are what God offers as an alternative. And understand that the world can be quite competitive, when it comes to the options that people might have before them. And that's why some people turn to the Lord and most people don't. All right? So it's the reasons why people pursue sin that matter. Those are the things that really matter and need to be addressed. Okay, what else do we have here? Because they believe they will get away with it, because they do not want to work. There can be some occasions when it is because they have the need, but that's definitely not always going to be the case. Okay, so let me peek at verse 28 again. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Okay, now what would relate to this? Is this a person who is perhaps stealing because they don't have an alternative? And obviously not. They're going to have lots of alternatives. They're going to have lots of forms of labor that they could engage in, that they can participate in the lives of others. And Paul says that they are to work with their hands, something that is good, that they would have something for themselves and have something to give to somebody else. And that this would be a different way of life that a person can engage in. So if you've got a person like this, are they stealing because they don't know what else to do with themselves? You could look at it from that point of view and say, okay, they don't know what else to do with themselves, and so we'll give this, for them to do, to help others who are genuinely in need. That can deal with the boredom issue, right? What about the desire for laziness? Person just simply does not feel like doing it. They don't want to do that. This is something that is going to be uncomfortable. A person has to engage in discomfort. I don't see that that's what's being described here. I don't think he's dealing with that kind of a person, that they're just simply not wanting to be uncomfortable. They're not wanting to do things that would make them feel as though they were not enjoying life, stuff like that. I don't see that happening in this verse, but like I said, these are things that do happen with various people. Okay, so you have to deal with the reasons. Now, what is common with all of these different reasons that I mentioned? A common thread does kind of exist. I personally think that it has a lot to do with the need for purpose. Okay, that we do have a need for purpose in our lives. And when there is the absence of purpose, like, why are you here? Well, I don't know. I'm just going to go and steal things. Okay? There's an absence of purpose, and that has an effect on people's lives. And so if you were to consider someone who's just out stealing things, then you can consider them as a person who probably needs to have some kind of purpose, real purpose in their lives. Okay? Now, you don't need to know the Lord to have purpose in your life. Obviously, there are lots of people who live their lives who do not steal, and do not know the Lord. Okay? They have found various purposes. And you can do that. People can do that just fine. Where they can say, this is why I live. This is why I engage, the day. The day that is in front of me. I do this because this is my purpose. These are my purposes. Okay? But all of those purposes are, not as good as what is offered through the purpose of being a child of God, of knowing your God, of having a relationship with your God, of not being alienated, but of being connected to your God and to be a participant in what He is doing. Those descriptions of purpose are much greater than what will be offered in the world. As the Lord gives you a new sense of purpose in your life because of your connection with Him, as that is developed, there will be a reduction of things like stealing. As these things happen within a person's heart, just let them happen. Don't resist that kind of change. But again, it happens because of a person growing closer to God, not being this issue not being addressed by the subject of punishment or rewards. Okay, that's a whole different thing. Okay, in the next verse, he talks about the issues related to law and grace, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the next message. In verse 29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Okay, this has to do with the subject of law and grace, and that has to do with the subject of the Old Covenant versus the New Covenant. And so we have a consistent theme of the change, of the new life, of the new relationship, the new way, of how we're going to live differently than we would have lived under the law. Verse 29 is a continuation of that theme. Okay, for those of you who are using this for your small groups, I got a question. I don't think it's very impressive, but it's something that I could come up with. Do you feel like someone is stealing from you? It's a way to start a conversation. Do you feel that someone is stealing from you in some way? Do you get that sense? Do you get that feeling? And that could open up some interesting conversations. And I'll continue into verse 29 in the next message. Thanks.